NRG Series classic matchup of control versus creativity. See Andy Bridges on the right there at both players at 3-0-1. Need to do some winning if they want to find themselves in the top 8 as well, but certainly still in it as George kicks us off with a Misty Rainforest and a passing of the turn. Andy got an Arid Mesa passing the turn, going to lead to George cracking, finding what will likely be a Triome. We'll see exactly what it is. Sure is a Raugrin Triome.
I like George's hoodie. Before we get more into the matchup, there's a cool little magic hoodie going on. But yeah, this is one that's going to be a little bit of a, we're going to sit here and wait. The 5-color creativity deck typically plays 4 spell pierces. That's going to allow us to sort of go for our combo, but not until turn 5. And the earliest we could ever do it is turn 3 with this build Andy has here today. So we're going to see a little draw going, and it's going to be interesting to see how the players maneuver around the counter spells, because George can't really close the game out in a timely manner, which is sort of what you need to do against creativity, because they can also go fairly long, but they can't go as long as George. So George here needs to make the game small and win very quickly, or very long. That's sort of the 2 normal ways the matchup plays out.
That makes quite a bit of sense as Andy is grabbing the Xander's Lounge here, known for the like Narset Days Undoing stuff. Of course, that can be powerful, but against something like a top decked Indomitable Creativity, it may not even put the the door on the game necessarily, as there's some powerful effects creativity deck can put forth. So, like you said, George kind of incentivized to get this deck over with. As you said, there's kind of a little bit of cat and mouse here, as both players kind of playing lands, passing the turn. George going to crack his Flooded Strand, see what he wants to get with that.
Yeah, George here only has Solitudes as his creatures, so no subtlety like we saw from Sarah 2 rounds ago. That's something that can be pretty helpful in these matchups, because the Archons do get cast because the games go so long.
Right. Just only access to Solitude. Of course, the Kaheera over there in the Companion Zone does tell you something about the texture of the creatures that George has access to. Breeding Pool tapped, just passing the turn. Content, not interested in using any 3 mana or anything like that now. Just keeping counter magic up as both players develop. Now, something that I am personally curious about, maybe you can speak to this a little bit. Do these, is there any chance that we're going to see maybe just like the Dwarven Mind Dwarf Token beatdown become like a real plan here?
Yeah, if the game goes long enough and George ends up fetch shocking, maybe get a couple creativity, like an Archon hits play, then it gets Wrath or whatever, we could see the dwarves come down. Typically, you don't want to expose the dwarves too early due to cards like Prismatic Ending only really having targets in Planeswalkers, and you want to be able to actually go for it. So you'll see players hold for it, but you can different spots do things. It looks like
I love
Fable
it.
into
Counterspell before the Fables even hit the table. Fable and the Mirror Breaker going to get cast, quickly answered by Counterspell by George. Pass the turn back, so Andy willing to pull the trigger first on casting spells. We'll see if George interested in tapping any mana on main phase now that the shields are down, as far as any Spell Pierce action or anything he would potentially see from the creativity deck.
Yeah, this is a great spot for George to get down the Narset Parter Veils. If he has, some way to protect like a Solitude to prevent the dwarf. And we're going to see, actually, it looks like George didn't have the 4th land, so just took a moment to play Teferi Time Raveler and draw a card and miss on the land there. This is Andy's big moment. He can just, get a dwarf and force it to be Solitude or bust.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, no 4th land drop is a huge deal for George. Big reason to tap some mana on the main phase, just try to hit land drops, not being able to, a huge deal. As we go ahead and Lightning Bolt away the Teferi. Dwarven Mind going to enter untapped, bring a token along with it. 3 mana the follow-up, maybe a Teferi of Andy's own.
Yeah, and so Andy here is sort of, setting up for a future creativity. Kind of a big sign there's probably no other land in hand. You probably don't want to play the Dwarven Mind until you kind of have to. And so Andy's exposing the dwarf, but sort of worth it to make sure we develop this Teferi, because now George has no counterspells, and as you might expect, George's deck is flushed with counterspells.
Yeah, I mean, the counterspells being shut off, like you mentioned, huge deal for creativity. Solitude doesn't even really work, and yeah, we're gonna have to Prismatic Ending that Teferi on 1, even though it's already gotten value just right away if you want your cards to work at all. And this does maybe do a little bit of representation of potentially having something like Solitude to pick off an Archon that would come through. So we'll see how Andy wants to respond. No land again for George. Andy, we'll see if he's going to miss a land drop here. Definitely, like you mentioned, kind of looked like he might not have a 5th land. Based on the sequencing so far, that might actually just hold true, as Teferi 3 is going to come down once again, draw a card right away. looks like some digging for lands to me.
Yeah, it looks like both players are flushed on spells, and we're going to get an attack for 1. Chip shots do add up. The Archon's attack for 9, and there's a lot of fetching that can happen. So what end up happening is a Leyline Binding on the Teferi here. And this is sort of the way, we saw George last turn Prismatic Ending at Teferi, left himself exposed, no counterspell. Leyline Binding, 1 mana away to really clean that up. And now George is back to, I have a handful of spells clearly because I don't have lands. I can maybe interact a bit. As both players laugh about not having lands, I think, here.
Yeah, and you have to want to watch this too. Is there's like a little bit of metagaming going on. Is you're sitting down against George Jabbour, you're on the NRG series, like what you're up against. So that's going to do some amount to inform what's going on. As we're going to Leyline Binding a Leyline Binding, and that's going to bring back Teferi. We'll see if this one wants to go upstairs or downstairs. It's gonna be downstairs. Draw a card.
Yeah, Andy just trying to make the land drops.
Yeah, did he find a land? Doesn't look like it. Imagine he probably would have played any land he drew pretty quickly.
Yeah, we hadn't actually untapped our dwarf there too. So the reason we're untapping it's because even though we are going to the red zone, we just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, looks that way. As the players kind of talking about clearing up the game state a little bit. Once again, Counter Magic kind of back online, a little bit of fighting there over some spells, but ultimately, kind of the Dwarven Mind Teferi, Andy a little bit ahead. That, of course, could change with the presence of another Leyline Binding or whatever, what have you. Kind of breaks the whole Leyline Binding mess back up as George draws. See if he can finally find a land, and he sure did. It's Flooded Strand. And quickly passing the turn back. No instant speed spells work, though. So this is going to be a big vulnerability point for George if Andy can ever find something resembling a creativity.
Yeah.
Even Transmogrify would be a fine find, I imagine.
Yeah, and George needs to find some way to get this Teferi off the table or spend this turn developing his own threats, Something like a Wandering Emperor, Mega Samurai. We see Andy here not attack because the Wandering Emperor could minus on the dwarf, and that would put him in a really bad spot. And he knows George has a bunch of spells in hand. We missed on lands for a bunch of turns. Clearly, there are spells coming. As George sort of sitting here thinking about, okay, what do I do to get out of this here? Because Teferi's putting me in such an awkward position. If I tap out and don't have an answer, I could be in huge trouble.
Yeah, it does look like George actually does have some spells to play. I thought we had some hand indications that might have led to pass the turn. Not quite. Is George interested in potentially casting some spells? And it is going to be the Leyline Binding. So this is just bindings on bindings on bindings. The question is, does this resolve? Could potentially spell pierce it. Looks like Andy's going to. George's like, yeah, sure, I'll pay. You got another one? Answer might be yes. Here's a fetch and response with the Leyline Binding still in the stack after we've paid.
Yeah. Interesting moment here. If we do have another spell pierce, this is as good as essentially holding up spell pierce. Teferi's in play, your opponent can't have a counter spell. Looks like it's a Sacred Foundry. We might be binding a Leyline Binding. And so we spell pierce to tap out a counter spell.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Here we go. We're just gonna binding the Leyline Binding. That way there's no counter magic up. That's gonna take care of that. Interesting. So there's just bindings flying everywhere. Ultimately, this still is going to favor Andy at the end of it all. Tough spot for George, but with no creativity quite yet. He's not just dead. We're not in a ton of trouble, but George does need to find a way that is going to work to get the Teferi off the table from if he wants any of his counter magic to work for the rest of this game. So we go back to Andy Bridges.
Yeah, take a Teferi. And the ticket with the Teferi with Indomitable Creativity puts us in a very awkward spot where now we can attack with the dwarf. And if George is like, all right, play my Wandering Emperor, minus kill your dwarf, Andy gets to go creativity. Boom.
Yeah,
blow you
good
out.
luck. And it looks like we might actually just be doing it now. That's a lot of mana. It is Indomitable Creativity. I have to imagine this is going to be for 2. Yeah, it sure is. So we're going to find 2 things. What could they be? I imagine they're going to be Archons of Creativity. Is there? We found 1 Archon of Creativity. Get a good look at that one. X, artifacts and or creatures. Looking at creatures. Got to get rid of those dwarves. As you mentioned, we're going to cast these, or no, you just put them directly on the battlefield. So we're going to put some Archons directly onto the battlefield here.
Yeah, I don't know how they always hit the Archons. It just feels like it shouldn't happen that way, but
We'll call it good deck building this go around.
Okay.
Either way, those dwarves are gone, turned into something much larger, as here is 2 copies of Archon of Cruelty. That is going to require George to discard 2 cards. It's going to happen right now. Nothing he can do about that thanks to Teferi Time Raveler. He did have the Solitude. That one hits the bin alongside what looks to be a Spell Pierce.
Yeah, and that's going to be a good sign if you're Andy that George might have a card like Supreme Verdict if he's willing to lose a Solitude right now.
Yeah. I mean, basically the card he has to have, right? Oh, I mean, otherwise they're just dying to a huge Archon army. It's not gonna go your way. So we're gonna fetch a tapped Hallowed Fountain here before we go back to George's turn.
Wait. Yesterday George had Dissension, like Guild Pact Hallowed Fountains, and now he has these. Does George have 2 sets of shock lands?
I mean, all he ever needs is Hallowed Fountain, so I don't know. It might as well.
That's a different verdict than yesterday, too. I think George has 2 complete blue-white control decks. Verdict wipes the board up.
Might as well just have it, Look, you don't need to move cards around. It's all I'm ever playing with is these cards. Might as well get extras.
I respect you know what? I just play with these cards, so why do I need to buy anything else? I don't want to move cards around. That's sweet.
Give me extra copies. Well, either way, we have the Supreme Verdict. That one can't be countered. No Spell Pierce action or anything like that going to work. And big deal for George, but Andy's still up multiple cards. And yeah, the leftovers is going to be pretty good. As here is Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Can't do anything about that one. Once again, thanks to Teferi.
Yeah. Yeah, an important thing to keep in mind too is like it looked like George got a 2-for-1 there, right? But those were 2 dwarves that came off one nominal creativity. So really, George got kind of 3-for-1 there, and 5-for-1 if we went into drawing cards counting. So George is stable and able to come back, and it's not insurmountable, especially with a card like Narset Perseverance and Days Undoing. But it is a thing where George needs to figure out some way to get there sooner than later because Andy is up so many cards right now.
Some kind of removal spell, Prismatic Ending or something like would be a big deal. Can get rid of the Fable token, also just having an ending for Teferi be a big deal. There is Prismatic Ending found off of the Narset downtick. See if he's interested in preserving the Narset now. Casting it sure seems to be, as there goes the Goblin Shaman token from Fable the Mirror Breaker. Narset looking currently fairly safe. And now we're kind of getting into that zone you were talking about where it's like, it's getting close to hardcast Archon time.
Yeah, and that Hardcast Archon is very real. Imagine that coming down right now. It's going to kill the Narset and make George discard the card in hand. And yeah, unfortunately, Andy.
Oh no!
So Andy discarded 2 cards. Can't draw extra off the Narset. That's a big thing there. Fable. Andy discarded Indomitable Creativity. Had the Dwarven Mind in hand. That would have been very good for Andy. He might still have another one as Andy
he has the Hardcast Archon. There it is. And it's going to take care of the Narset. Another one was rolled up in the hand. They're all gone in the graveyard. Wow.
That was pretty big. Yeah, I was wondering last time if George was supposed to hold the Hallowed Fountain in order, to prevent an Archon from coming down. I don't think he actually draws a card because it's all one ability. So Andy here, we'll have everyone look at it real quick. But yeah, Andy shouldn't draw a card, I think, because it actually resolves all at once. So it'll be fine, though. I don't think Andy had any other cards in hand. So yeah, we didn't just draw a card. But yeah, George has nothing now. Kind of need to draw.
Yeah, that's such a big deal for Andy, just having the Archon dialed up. Didn't even discard it. I love it. Didn't even think that's how. It just didn't discard it, had it ready to go. And George drawing a land's not going to be good enough. Andy, despite discarding 2 cards to the Fable, doesn't matter at all. Archon of Cruelty is going to get it done there in game number 1. And what was an impressive showing of how the 5-color creativity deck can kind of slog through the blue-eye control strategy.
Yeah, it was really impressive. I guess Andy did it because he had the last Archon in hand, so he couldn't hit anymore with the creativity. I really wish he had discarded it and not even tried to draw. And George goes, "You can't draw." And Andy goes, "I know," and then plays the Archon. That would have been the ultimate move.
Just such a flex. Oh yeah, I don't need these cards. They don't even work. It's Archon. Speaking of cards that work, let's talk about sideboards here. Oh man. Oh, man. Okay, so here we go. We got George Jabbour. This should be a familiar sight to a lot of the NRG series viewers. We have Azorius Control And the sideboard starts with Kaheera the Orphanguard, followed up by 2 copies of Subtlety, 2 copies of Flusterstorm, 2 copies of Hallowed Moonlight, 1 Wear Tear, 2 Dress Down, 2 Rest in Peace, 2 Blood Moon, and 1 Temporary Lockdown. Mason, talk to me about some sideboard adjustments.
So George Jabbour here, technically with a Jeskai control deck, because we got these Blood Moons, that's going to be really good against the creativity deck. Despite being sort of a mono red deck splashing a bunch of colors, they actually need the mountains to be, I'm sorry, they need the Dwarven Mines to be mines and not like a mountain. So the dwarves won't be produced. That card can be really punishing. And since it's all dual lands, we can't cast any of our other cards. George is going to slam the 2 Blood Moons and then the 2 Hallowed Moonlight. That's going to prevent the creativity from working. Very powerful card in that sense. Besides that, George has a couple other cards he might want to bring in, like Wear Tear. There's a bunch of Leyline Bindings, Fable the Mirror Breakers. We could see all of those come in. We've seen players bring in Temporary Lockdown sometimes as a thing. Also, Dress Down is a card that you probably would like as a way to prevent the Archon from actually in the ETB trigger. If you imagine that game, if we actually Dress Down in response to the creativity and we didn't cast a Supreme Verdict, we'd actually be in a very reasonable spot. And George has a lot of cards he can trim on in various spots, like Chalice of the Void, that aren't very impactful in this matchup.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And it sounds like there's a lot of options, a lot of really good options for George Jabbour. On the flip side, let's talk about Andy Bridges and what the 5-color creativity deck has access to in the sideboard. Start with, we have a Hidetsu Consumes All, 1 Elish Norn Mother of Machines, 1 March of Otherworldly Light, 2 copies of Nature's Claim, 2 copies of Veil of Summer, 4 full copies of Change the Equation, 1 copy of Destroy Evil, 2 copies of Hallowed Moonlight, and 1 copy of Basic Plains. What adjustments are we making here?
So if our friend Andy here knows that George has the Blood Moons, he's going to bring in the Plains and take out his basic mountain in his deck. That is why Plains is in the sideboard. It is for the Blood Moons, and then you can bring in cards like Destroy Evil to pop the Blood Moon along with March of the Really Light. We might see Andy bring those in anyways for Leyline Binding, especially if maybe he knows George has it. If not, we'll definitely see that for game number 3 if we get there. The other card Andy's really going to want is Change the Equation. So ironically, it's going to hit the Blood Moon, which wasn't our intent, but in this matchup, Change the Equation is actually sort of a counter spell for their counter spells. Imagine it like a Dovin's Veto, essentially, where you're playing this card to protect. Combine that with your Veil of Summers, you're going to be able to sort of jam your threats through, and they have a lot of main deck cards that are fine, but not really what the matchup's about. And you can afford to take out a bunch of these cards like Lightning Bolt, for example, that you don't really need and force through your own combos. So Change the Equation, sort of a modern all-star, something that when you play this deck, you board it in so many matchups.
A lot of ability to pivot to being able to more or less interact on the stack seems to be the way to do it. And yeah, Change the Equation, kind of unintuitive, but does make a lot of sense when you think about the context of the matchup as players are shuffling up here for game number 2. George Jabbour going to be on the play this time, hopefully with access to a few more lands. If you're enjoying this coverage, all you lovely people here for Modern, there's plenty more where that came from across all year. All of the NRG series events for the year, I believe, have been announced. So if you are at all interested in participating, especially interested in Modern, go ahead and head over, sign up. And of course, if you're watching here today and all you can really do is watch, please feel free to follow, subscribe, be able to cut out some of those ads and maybe get some cool emotes along the way. Thank you all for your support either way. And let's take a look at what's happening in these opening hands.
Yeah, when they look at the opening hand, Twitch Prime, here's the deal with it. Somebody's got to get it. We don't care if it's us, Drake. We just want you to give it to somebody. It doesn't even have to be a Magic streamer. It could be your favorite streamer or whatever. My favorite streamer is Ludwig. He's not on Twitch anymore. So I just throw my Twitch Prime wherever I can. If you want to throw it to us, that's great. If you want to throw it to somebody else, we don't mind. Just make sure you use it before Bezos gets that free money, as George does not look happy with this 7.
yeah, definitely not the face of someone excited about a 7-card hand. Andy, on the other hand, maybe a little bit more excited about what's going on. And George does, in fact, decide to ship it back. Andy does appear to keep. Not interested in that one. Is George going to head down to 6 cards? a lot of Ludwig fans in the chat. You really struck a nerve, it seems, with the Twitch chat.
I'm a Ludbud. What can I say? I just love his content. It's very funny.
extremely reasonable. Yeah, I mean, normally this small channel, you may have heard of them, NRG Series. They tend to get my Twitch subscription when I get around to it. That I get from the Amazon Prime. Make sure to ship that on over. But sometimes Cube season, Caleb Durward gets it. I'm moving around sometimes.
Norm said he'd mod me a couple events ago, and I never got mod, so I'm holding out. I'm sort of holding it in Norm's head.
Just saving it up. Just no shot energy gets it until you're modded.
Yeah,
Oh, I
he
love
says he
it.
doesn't negotiate with terrorists, so we're just sort of at a standstill. So
We'll see who breaks first. Both players starting off with a fetch land. George going to crack his Scalding Tarn, find himself a Raugrin Triome. And maybe not the posturing of someone that has Blood Moon in their hand, or maybe already has access to the basics he needs.
Well, I was gonna say, I think George, the way his deck's constructed, has to get the Triome to get the Blood Moon. So in some ways, this is sort of the line you have to take.
I love it.
I'm gonna double check. He might have a sneaky little steam fence there. He sometimes has Breeding Pool in his deck because it lets him cast Kaheera and Prismatic Ending and Leyline Binding. Looks like no steam vents this weekend. Oh no, there is one. It was hiding out over here. Okay. So
I actually have so much respect for the Blood Moon deck that supports Geier, Sanitarium, Hall of Heliod's Generosity, and 2 different Triomes. That's some just good deck building. I love it. Love it so much.
I think you and I use the word support very differently.
Look, it casts the Blood Moon, doesn't it? Taps that colorless or the generic cast.
To me, this reminds me a lot of Zelda, where you kind of hobble together your 2 pieces and you make something barely work. But it does.
Fair enough. I've seen some nasty creations people have made doing that, so maybe I just don't get it. I'm not maybe a builder.
Yeah, I know what. I don't want to talk about Zelda. I'm sort of stuck in the tutorial still. As we see Andy
I saw that on Twitter. Yeah, that's incredible.
It's hard.
Andy, we're thinking about the turn 2 play here as George kind of representing Counterspell. Looks like an untapped Sacred Foundry going to happen, and Ren and 6 the play.
Oh.
And George head immediately hits hands. That's not the face of someone with an answer to a Ren and 6 that he wants to use, if at all.
Yeah, I wonder if George maybe has Blood Moon, is thinking about, does he supposed to fight over the Ren in case there's a Blood Moon answer, or just in general, like, because typically Ren and 6 is a card you immediately want to counter, because as the game goes along, they're going to hit all their land drops, and they're going to have a mana advantage over you, along with a card that wins the game in the ultimate of Ren and 6. So this might be a spot where George just has like a Blood Moon, but is going to use a counterspell just in case the Blood Moon is covered by Andy in some way. Boseiju is a card that sometimes players have and can generate treasures off Strike It Rich. There's a lot of differing opinions on how to fight through a Blood Moon in the 5-color creativity matchups. Like we saw earlier, Strike It Rich is something that can do that, and then cards like Boseiju turn on, where Andy is choosing to, I think, use the more clean example of just having a plains.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, as George, does fetch the island, so that does speak maybe to some amount of planning for Blood Moon. The counterspell does come down, answer Ren and 6, even in the abstract, like from Blood Moon, it's just a good card in control matchups. Mystic Gate deployed, 3 mana immediately reach for, and it's going to be Teferi Time Raveler, who's immediately going to downtick. Card coming for George, and a turn passed over to Andy. We'll see what his follow-up, his response is. A lot of good 3-drops for Andy as well, as he very quickly sacrificed what looks to be a Bloodstained Mire.
Yep. As we can I get something? I wonder if this is going to just be a Teferi game where we play a little Hearthstone. No one gets to cast instants. We all hang out. We sort of slam our cards, call it a day.
There we go. Bane phase only. No tricks. It's all face up. The Steam Vent's the card that's grabbed. Very, very colorful mana base. And it is Teferi, Hearthstone time, as you said. Going to also have a card coming. Really, really shows how little pressure there is for Teferis in this matchup. Players willing to just come down tick right away, draw their card, get their value out of it, and it's not going to get pressured by any creatures. We're good to go.
Yeah, all the things that are going to answer this are going to be either sacrifices from Archons or Prismatic Ending and Leyline Binding. So it is sort of better to get your first one up off the ground and got your card back, and then work towards your ability to get another card maybe.
Flooded Strand coming down for George. No shortage of land drops this game, like we saw in game 1, so things seem to be panning out. George seems to be struggling a little bit with exactly how he wants to proceed from here.
Yeah, I can't quite tell what's in his hand. He's keeping them close to the chest. So I wonder, I'm trying to figure out, reverse engineer, what could be the problems that we're thinking about? And I wonder if it is just like Blood Moon, if we fetch Plains or Island, because we can't have both here and get underneath the Blood Moon. Looks like we're just going to forego Blood Moon, if it even came in this matchup, and grab a Zagoth Triumph. George maybe just likes the matchup without Blood Moon. We talked about it maybe being part of the plan. It's possible that's only 4 cards, or decks like Amulet Titan,
Sure.
And things of that nature. So looks like we're going to get a Leyline Binding coming down.
Yeah, Leyline Binding the Teferi. I mean, this is what we saw a lot of in game 1. The Teferis, even at 1 or whatever, you can't pressure them, and they are going to be a problem for the entire game as far as counterspells go. Having 1 and your opponent doesn't is a huge deal. And George willing to Leyline Binding a Teferi that's already drawn a card for that reason. So we'll see exactly how Andy wants to proceed from here now that instants don't work for him. And we saw him do a pretty good job cleaning up the Teferis on the other side of the field with things like Leyline Bindings of his own in the last game. We'll see if he has something like that going on, or if his hand steers him somewhere else.
Yeah, Andy's sort of tanking. I wonder if Andy maybe doesn't have a land in hand. It's got like kind of a one spell turn situation. As
potentially Renin 6, still pretty good on this spot. And we're talking about things, you could pressure the Teferi if you absolutely want to, but certainly he's going to want to pick up a land right away here, start getting the card advantage train rolling, and can also do things like get a Dwarven Mine in play. And the 1/1s can pressure the Teferi. So this Ren represents quite a bit. I mean, we countered one on turn 2. The one on turn 4 is going to work and provide a land for Andy in the form of Bloodstained Mires. We go back to George. Uptick right away. That is a basic Plains.
It's a Saturn Plains.
Yeah, a lot of the Unfinity lands I've seen around. They look pretty on the screen. I like them. Full art.
They're nice. The island leaves a little to be desired. The Plains is cool.
Yeah, the little rings and stuff.
Yeah.
George doing a big think on his turn, decides not to do anything. Once again, his spells do work at instant speed. Teferi ticked up, so even sorcery is going to work at instant speed. Once they pick off the Ren, you would have to do it, obviously before the activation. Does not seem interested in that, as Arid Mesa, the picked up card. No crack for the fetch land from Andy on end step. Holding the Dwarven Mine, something you called out is a common play pattern for the creativity decks.
Yeah, that is just something that you're going to want. Oh, as Teferi 3 comes down. George is going to want to counter this if he's got a counter spell.
Yeah, I mean, George giving it a think. I would be fairly surprised if this one resolves. Maybe he just doesn't care. Not a lot of good things to bounce. Bouncing Leyline's not good.
Well, no. So George can bounce his own Leyline if he's willing to lose his Teferi. And then the legend rule happens, and then we re-Leyline the Teferi. And the Ren 6 already ticked up, so we know it won't ping our Teferi.
Sure.
So that's the way. If we're willing to lose our own Teferi, we can answer this Teferi, which is maybe something George is thinking about. Do I want to do this versus hold a counter spell? Because this can go wrong in multiple ways. For George, It's not a clean play, but it is one that
does just resolve. Down tick right away. All right. And with that, no bounce. Choose to leave the Leyline in play. Makes a lot of sense. Legend rule is a thing as we pass back to George. No move with all that mana. Let's see what he wants to do now. 3 mana coming here. Prismatic Ending, targeting the Teferi. That one goes away. Now I'm going to hit the Exile Zone, unlike the Renin 6. And Hallowed Fountain is going to interplay tapped. 2 mana up. Looks like Counterspell to me, but we didn't Counterspell the Teferi. Maybe holding it, Prismatic Ending does do well against something like Teferi, but maybe less so against Indomitable Creativity.
Yeah, Prismatic Ending is really in this matchup only for those 2 walkers, Teferi and the Renin 6. Sometimes if you establish a dominant board with your Teferi plussing a bunch, then it can be used to hit the tokens, since Prismatic is sort of, universal in what it hits. But we do see Andy here just sort of making land drops every turn and not even using his Ren 6 shit. I wonder if it's because we might see a minus of it, as we do see Leyline Binding.
Leyline Binding. Yeah, I think that one gets a little messy if you choose to let that one happen. We'll see. George's thinking about a lot of mana left over after this Leyline Binding. So, the question is kind of if you put the shields down, what does it look like potentially if things don't go your way? And Hallowed Moonlight is actually going to be the card cast. And that one's going to work thanks to Teferi. Can't do anything to really stop that. And that will keep things like Dwarven Mine tokens entering the battlefield, as Leyline Binding is going to get Leyline Binding. Teferi enters play.
I wonder if you minus on the binding, George would maybe binding your Teferi, and then you can binding again to draw again. Like, you could sort of have this gentleman's agreement that, hey, I'll spend a white to draw a card. Do you agree?
Yeah. Is this the prisoner's dilemma? I feel like this is the prisoner's dilemma. Nobody gets either cards at all, or we both get a card for a white every turn or something. Mess. Just what we needed.
And you see Andy here considering minusing so that the Teferi has to die. If they want to bounce the Leyline Binding.
I already got access to plenty of lands. Not interested in grabbing the Dwarven Mines quite yet, because once again, there is a Hallowed Moonlight that is active for this turn. So that's going to stop any token production this turn.
It's awkward though because Hallowed Moonlight, yeah, we want to use it now before we don't have a chance to cycle, I guess, because Teferi is going to be awkward. But if we had creativity, we could just tick up with Teferi and then cast the creativity at a different time. Like if George decides to minus his Teferi, so you sort of force George to not minus their Teferi. It's just some
yeah,
really
right. Because like the George's Teferi is going to stick around as we go back to George. It does take a draw step, so like you're not really going to be able to do it at instant speed before things happen. And if George has another answer to your Teferi, which has been kind of the name of the game through the first game and this game, then you're in a really bad spot.
Yeah, it's true, but we might, if George has lots of Teferis, he might want to minus his Teferi on the binding, which would give an opportunity. But I guess he just doesn't want to risk losing the card, which is fair. George doesn't have a Solitude.
Small flash there. Yeah, I saw a Solitude. That one doesn't work at instant speed and also does not hit Planeswalkers. So a lot to think about here, I'm sure. Navigating all these Teferis and Leyline Bindings is not something that's intuitive at all.
George minus. Yep. No, he's
no targets. Not interested in playing the Leyline Binding game.
Yeah. And George just wants to have his card and eat it too.
Yeah. Nom nom. What is the follow-up? 3 cards in hand for George. A lot to think about. 2 Planeswalkers in play. I'll tell you what, Planeswalker Wrath here would be real nice. Something like that. I don't even know what's available in the format, but I can't imagine it's at a playable rate.
Yeah, I am really unsure of what's going to happen here because George can play this Solitude in the main phase, which he maybe has to do because this Teferi is preventing him from comboing or from interacting with the combo. But obviously, if he plays the Solitude, then the Archon's going to stick around. But he already played a land, which is maybe something you'd want to keep for the creativities. So I think there's a real chance George just taps out here for like a Solitude to try and get pressure and then just might lose. Twitch chat's bringing up Flame Blitz. That card would be unbeatable here.
Sure. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Flame Blitz. Hey, we got red. Maybe we should get some of those in the deck. I mean, like you said, it's interesting because George is actually really low on resources. And here is a Shark Typhoon cycle.
0.
Not casting it, just 0 mana cycle. Perhaps
Not
a sign of weakness.
1.
That's something you could do in the face of Teferi. What are we digging towards? We're so behind on cards. Andy has 2 Planeswalkers in play and quite a few cards in hand. Thanks to Ren and 6, who's been able to provide land drops. Some amount of those may be lands. 3 mana tapped. Gonna buy Kaheera and pass the turn. 2 mana up, but Teferi stops the game actions. Okay.
I wonder why George didn't. There must be some 4 mana card. Because even putting in a 1/1 would prevent, the Ren and 6 from taking up and getting another land drop, which is valuable and works towards the ultimate. It's small value, but I'm unsure as we are getting double dwarfs here, and that's probably not a good sign if you're a George Jabbour fan.
Yeah, I can't imagine George is too excited about it either. I mean, we definitely respected it with the Hallowed Moonlight on the previous turn, understanding what could happen if, the Teferi was allowed to exist alongside all this untapped mana. And there is the Indomitable Creativity that likely is going to go for all 3 of those Dwarven tokens, which means 3 Archons.
And George has 4 cards in hand, so George gets to keep 1. So as long as Andy still has them all in deck, which Andy seems to. If Andy's access to, Andy has Elesh Norn.
Okay,
so
all right.
Yeah.
Well,
Elesh Norn is really strong in this matchup. I didn't highlight it because I wasn't sure if you bring it in for Leyline Binding, but it stops Leyline Binding, and anytime you X's 2, you always get double triggers. But Drake, if you X's 3, you get 4 triggers. So George is going to lose his entire hand.
Yeah, and that stops something like Supreme Verdict. It's just you can't just hold a Supreme Verdict and be like, yeah, that's good enough. Mother Machine's going to stop that from happening thanks to doubling these triggers, and that's going to be nasty. Look at that one.
It is. Yeah, look, George loses all his. So Solitude as well. That's something now you can't actually use.
It wouldn't even work if it wasn't in the graveyard, just gone. And they get a look at Elesh Norn, the 4/7 Vigilant Legendary Torpor Orb plus Panharmonicon stapled together, as is the kind of templating for all the Phyrexian Praetors.
So this is an 8 for 1. in case you were curious at home.
I was not tracking, but you know, I established that it wasn't good. It did not look good, as Andy's flushed with resources.
Yeah, George had a moment of like, did you play a land? And he's like, no, I was holding this fetch land. George's like, yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, and maybe it speaks to that. I don't know, that would have been just a kill if the third Archon was in the deck as well. He could just do it for 4. George draws a card, rolls his eyes. What could that be? Oh, it's the Leyline Binding he was looking for last turn. That one's going to go up to Teferi. Not going to be good enough. George is going to shake the hand of Andy and has failed in this matchup 2-0. And for what was a game very much about Teferi's, even though it was ended through Archon of Cruelties.
Yeah, Teferi really matters against the control decks, both for and against them. With them, it makes it so your counterspells always resolve. And there are cards like Veil of Summer and things like that we talked about. These Archon decks could be playing along with a little bit of soft mission there. And then here it just makes it so your combo always resolves. So this is why we have seen control decks be so powerful, is because when they have Teferi, they're sort of unbeatable, but also we see why they're so attackable. Other players can use Teferi to come at them. So that's pretty big there. I don't know if we have time for our backup match, Drake, but I'd love to get some more Magic in if we can.
Well, it sounds like we can, Mason. So let's dive right into that. And we got, from what I understand, is a pretty interesting matchup here between Mono White, Hammer, and Golgari Yogmoth, both kind of staples of the format. As we're going to kick things off here with our backup match. Blooming Marsh into Ignoble Hierarch, responded to with a Plains into Esper Sentinel. These players playing very quickly as we have the kind of the backup pre-recorded here. Going to get a look at the Hammer Yogmoth matchup. Give me some thoughts on this as these players are developing mana and Wall of Roots and another Ignoble Hierarch comes down.
Yeah, Benjamin's like, yeah, who cares about the Esper install? No, so this matchup is really interesting if it goes kind of long, because Yogmoth is really good at sort of breaking up when you go for the Hammer onto a creature, because all the creatures are sort of low toughness with how cheap they are. So you see Benjamin here is going to go after Amber's one toughness creature, as soon as Yogmoth hits the battlefield. So Amber wants to set up a early hammered creature and be able to go for it, or have enough creatures that Benjamin can't shoot down all of her creatures. As we're seeing Benjamin have a turn 3 Yogmoth, and that's going to be incredibly hard. You see Amber try to set up a Colossus Hammer maybe for a Pure Soul Paladin later, but yeah, Benjamin not going to have it. Just immediately going to sacrifice the Young Wolf. And Amber with main deck Surge to Salvation. We see this with
Surge to Salvation. Yeah, that's not going to do what she needs it to do against a Yogmoth, which could just be responded to again. Does require Benjamin to use more resources. And here's a Solitude in response. We're building up the stack, targeting the Yogmoth. This is quite the stack indeed for 2 decks that do not include blue.
Yeah, and Amber here, so kind of baited Benjamin there, made him lose one of his mana creatures that can be very important, and said, all right, well, now this is gone. You're going to get 1 less card from the activation of Yogmoth because it targeted. You don't get as many card draws, and your Yogg is down, so you're going to have less total material. And for Amber, that Solitude's always going to go for the Yogmoth, so well played by her there.
Yeah, I love that sequence there for Amber. As far as, a Yogmoth's disastrous for you. That's something you called out. Going to do a great job clearing the battlefield, making sure this Colossus Hammer doesn't work. But that exchange could have been worse for her. I mean, this could have been a wrath for a long time. The Yogmoth can, start clearing that persist -1/-1 counter and getting even more value. And the way we built up that stack kind of prevented all that from happening. We'll see if she has enough follow-up materials to work with in order to actually start to rebuild. A follow-up saga can do some of that work, creating some construct tokens.
Yeah, and we're going to see Amber here probably to spend the next couple of turns making constructs and getting the triggers and sort of building up probably a Shadow Spear, just some smaller, less all-in cards. That way we can't be broken up by a Yogmoth, and we can actually attack through this sort of chump blocker army. That's sort of the other hard part about the matchup is, if your Hammer's up on a ground creature, these Undying creatures buy you 2 turns. Shadow Spear really breaks that dynamic here, as we do see Amber make a construct.
Yeah, make that construct. Both sagas rolling up. Have to, we called out Shadow Spear. That card definitely going to be a player in this game. Amber's looking to win. A lot of ground pounders to work with. Amber's going to go ahead and float a mana off of the Urza Saga that is going to be sacrificed. We'll see what she wants to go and grab. Has to be cost specifically 0 or 1. And Shadow Spear is the grab. So heads up call there. Going to provide trample and lifelink, allow for some racing situations, as she does need to close the door on this game before another Yogmoth gets added to the mix, because that's when things start to get very disastrous. And we'll see what the follow-up here is. Silent clearing, take a damage, maybe some Pure Steel Paladin, and it sure is. That's going to have Metalcraft and going to make a really big construct.
Yeah, that's going to be a 13, I believe.
Oh, how about another hammer? How about 10 more? How's that sound?
I think that's game. I don't know the exact math. I think
Bonk.
it's
Haven't done the math. I can tell you it's a lot. Gonna need a lot of creatures.
We are joking, but Benjamin is at 20 life, so this might be close. It is a 25 power creature, and there is 4 toughness here, 5, 6. So we'll actually be at 1. We got Dryad Arbor, which is going to actually get you net a life because there's an Innkeeper in play. So
sure, yeah, you gain the life from Innkeeper. Okay.
Benjamin
got a little bit of life to work with.
Yeah, and so Benjamin can block here and live. And it's important to note that Benjamin does have cards like Grist, which can maybe re-kill this, but we're just going to have another creature. So Benjamin, not out of it yet, probably at 1, I'm going to guess. Kind of want to block with the minimum amount of things you need to.
Yeah, minimum amount. That way, if you do draw something like a Yogmoth or a Grist, you still have materials to work with in order to actually maybe start to mitigate some of this. But you called out Grist, maybe not going to be good enough with 2 creatures on the other side of the battlefield. It needs to be something like a Yogmoth into a powerful follow-up. We'll see what we can assemble as far as that goes. Do have a persist creature still. It does not look like we have anything. And Benjamin gonna pick it up here from a impressive game of Hammer versus Yogmoth, able to contain the Yogmoth, normally nearly lights out on the spot, and then follow up with an impressive Pure Steel Paladin, plenty of materials to work with, and just a ton of life, ton of damage. And yeah, I mean, not normally how I've seen that matchup go. Impressive work from Amber.
Yeah, that's a moment where you see the Solitudes really come in, that innovation in the mono white hammer to actually have interaction. Normally that turn 3 Yogmoth, that's game Drake. We're talking about how Amber is going to try and pull together some constructs. Maybe she barely puts it together, but it's nowhere near as clean as that. We see that plus the search, plus some well play on her part. We saw how she baited the search innovation. She could have very easily led on using Solitude, but then we would have had more resources. So great play from her. Let's see what's in their sideboards and how to make up. Oh, okay. So what happened is we're getting a little close on time. So we're going to hop into game 3. Benjamin ends up winning a pretty quick game 2, apparently. So for the sake of making sure the tournament goes forward, let's just get into game number 3 here.
Yeah, be able to watch the most action possible. Have to imagine the sideboarding is still going to be pretty simple. Things to stop the Yogmoth from existing and removal spells for Yogmoth, and Benjamin probably going to bring in some artifact and enchantment hate. So to the extent that exists, we have deck list for that, but let's get a look at game 3 so we can watch the conclusion of this match before the next round. So Benjamin winning game 2 means Amber going to kick us off almost certainly as Benjamin finishes resolving his mulligan. Here's a turn 1 Springleaf Drum, passing of the turn to Benjamin.
Yeah, so really quickly here, Amber, she's going to have like Solitude's Blacksmith Skills, more Surges. She's rocking a multiple main deck Surges, 3 this weekend. And then there's going to be just Force of Vigors, Fatal Pushes, Go for the Throats, Filigree Silax from the Golgari Yogmoth player. So those are sort of the key cards. Both players are sort of, you see, posturing against one another post-board here as the Urza Saga comes down.
Yeah, absolutely. Urza Saga, a big key component we saw in the first game. We'll see how it can be utilized this game as the Birds of Paradise, somewhat innocuous, obviously worth a lot more once Yogmoth comes down. Seems like she has some options. Any creature will instantly be able to make some mana thanks to the turn 1 Springleaf Drum. We'll see how we want to sequence things as far as that goes. Shadow Spear added to the mix and just a passing of the turn. Maybe a little weak potentially. Maybe riding off the back of this Saga, being able to make some constructs.
Yeah, it might be another Saga hand. It might be like Saga plus some, Surge of Salvation stuff. It's possible that, Benjamin used a bunch of Force of Vigor type cards in game 2 to get an early advantage, and Amber sort of kept a slower hand, saying that maybe Benjamin mulligan towards stuff like that. We don't quite know, but the way that an opponent chooses to play the game sometimes influences your mulligans, where normally maybe you want to keep a hand like this on a 7 cards, but, your opponent mulligans a bunch towards a Force of Vigor or whatever, keep it quick 7. You're like, okay, I'm going to need my Surges this game. This hand has them. Sort of adjust how your opponent is playing. Also, it's possible she just has a turn 4 hammer lined up. We saw last game how she sort of just, had the Pure Steel Paladin, and that sort of draw can be very easy to happen here. As Walroots, Birds of Paradise.
Walroots, Birds. Check it out. I got a little 2-pair here as a bunch of mana put into play. No Yogmoth quite yet, but we saw the turn 3 Yogmoth and how powerful that was in game 1. I'm going to need something like the Solitude to make that happen. Yet once again, as Giver of Runes added to the mix. Now I'm going to be able to make mana right away and make a construct token thanks to the Springleaf Drum. So that can come up as well. But, of course, there's that ever-looming possibility of having this Yogmoth on the following turn. Amber needs to be mindful of, to the extent that she can actually stop it from happening. But even if she has something like a Solitude or whatever, the leftovers are pretty good. Saga, Sigarda's Aid now. That's going to make any hammers found off of the Urza Saga be able to be equipped right away if she can make it through this turn. And 4 mana tap right away. Here is Yogmoth, Thran's Physician, ready to go to work.
Yeah, and we talked about this before. Amber's going to have a bunch of cards like Blacksmith Skill and Surge. Benjamin's going to have to commit 2 creatures before we even find out. The first bird's going to resolve. The first thing we'll sacrifice, put a minus counter, and then we'll move from there. It's most likely going to be bird since Wall of Roots hasn't been used yet. But we might see a floating of a mana and then sacrifice.
Yeah, I think the Wall of Roots been used for this turn. Didn't tap any lands to produce this Yogmoth.
Correct.
But here is the first sacrifice. Going to take 2 sacrifices to actually dispatch of this Giver of Runes. And even then we can make it like a construct that's going to require more. So actually like clearing Amber's board, not trivial here like it normally is. Normally you see a lot of X1s and stuff like that. Not really the case here.
Yeah, we kind of saw Amber equip the Shadow Spear as well. So it implies to me that she probably has something because she didn't just equip, but it looks like she's going to float a mana.
Yep, float.
Okay.
Untap. Active. Uptick the Saga. See, she's got a couple cards left to work with, it seems. All this mana held up from Ben. No more sacrifices. Is maybe screams something like Court of Calling. Not sure there's much Amber can even do about it, as a construct's going to be made here. Gonna go searching.
Yeah, and we saw last game how this construct's pretty big here. So even if we do Quarter Calling, we we're not for sure gonna get it.
Pithing Needle.
Oh, what a great name!
I love it. I would name Yogmoth. We don't have access to what they named, but what I would name if I was in Amber's shoes is Yogmoth Thran Physician.
So our director is telling us it was naming Yogmoth. Yeah, as you might expect here. And that's a big one. If there's not a Force of Vigor or Boseiju, she has really sort of set up here. And, the Sigarda's Aid looked like it was going to, maybe force the hand here. But, yeah, we're going to get a Quarter Calling like you mentioned. We floated mana off the Wall of Roots to leave up mana. Makes you wonder if maybe a Scavenging Ooze is the card we're grabbing as a reason not to just use the mana, as it was a Haywire
Might. Okay, so that can dispatch of the Pithing Needle.
Yeah, interesting choice there to not use the green. There might be another chord where we're just
we might have more action here after the fact, with Yogmoth and what have you. And there's the Blacksmith skill. Like you called out. Yeah, I'll take that hexproof. Thank you.
Yeah. And you know what? This is a moment for Benjamin, right? Amber's shown she's pretty proficient with the deck. She didn't equip the Shadow Spear, and so she had to have something, and it makes sense. She didn't want to fight over with the Blacksmith skill before because she knew she needed to protect her Urza Saga. And here you go. And that's why she floated the white as well. So Benjamin's sort of, gotta figure out what I'm going to do.
Yeah, all right, now what? I need to find another answer. That one's not going to cut it, and we'll see what Benjamin has. Based on the posturing, I'm not optimistic that the answer is anything at all as we move quickly to Benjamin's turn.
Yeah, Benjamin's maybe going to have to endurance himself if he left it in and then buy
trying to reach into this? Yeah, that's a tough way to do it. We do see the chord in hand that you called out, a second Chord of Calling. Probably was intended to grab an Undying creature. Now, maybe doesn't get to do that.
Yeah. And this is a moment I feel like where, we talk about in the booth, sometimes you want to pre-plan your entire turn and then sort of execute, right? That's a great way to do it, or as much as you can to a draw point. And we sort of saw here, Amber thought through her turn, the turn before, and kind of into this next one. And Benjamin sort of just threw it around like, oh, yeah, okay, you got me with Pithing Needle. Well, I've got a Haywire Might. Don't worry about it. Didn't think of the implications there. And it's sort of getting called out here. And it's going to have to do some groundwork to make up for it. Now, Benjamin does have an infinite combo in his deck that's going to help. And Grist the Hunger Tide is going to help as well with stabilizing the battlefield, but it's not out of the woods yet.
And none of the woods. Able to, keep the board clear, potentially something like this construct being able to kind of start actually getting the game over with. We were talking the entire time about kind of breaking open from underneath this Pithing Needle and the like, just to enable, we have Fatal Push too, so maybe we can just start upticking. Being able to break out from underneath this Pithing Needle, now Fatal Push, Grist, able to just start kind of playing around it. It's like, all right, well, I guess I got to win the game without Yogmoth just going crazy. So what does that look like? Looks like Grist upticking and making some insects. Gonna be able to do some sacrificing from there.
I feel like, what happened to the construct again?
It just got Fatal Pushed by
Fatal Push. Oh, okay. Sorry.
And then we upticked our Grist. Yeah, there we go. Now Handless has been. And we are back to Amber. And so Amber, doing a lot better than most Hammer players in the face of a Yogmoth, but is going to need to find some pressure that doesn't just immediately die to Grist. Maybe something like an Inkmoth Nexus or something along those lines. in order to really be able to have a chance to steal this game post all of this Grist Yogmoth action. And there is an attack for 3 from Yogmoth and the insect, kind of the mopey beatdown plan B. No play from Ben. Back to Amber we go.
Huh. Okay. We're going to get attacked here. Interesting. Yeah. Amber's going to need a card, maybe like Stoneforge is like the first step. So that like the Stoneforge has to be answered and then you can do something, but maybe not.
I mean, Stoneforge plus something like a blacksmith skill could also matter too. The thing is, every threat is somewhat threatening. So like Grist kind of needs to get rid of everything. And with Sigarda's Aid just looming, you could just die out of nowhere to some stray hammers that are in the hand. And we see here comes that Grist tick down. See a Young Wolf, get out of here, Ornithopter. Just really respecting the instant speed kill potential of Sigarda's Aid as an attack for 4 comes across the red zone, and back to Amber we go.
Yeah. And you're seeing Benjamin here sort of tying up and be like, okay, I can only lose if I let something stick around right now. I need to just make sure this happens.
Yeah, and we have multiple things that, we have multiple uses of Grist to kill things. And, Presto Paladin, again, pretty prime target, although it can be blocked. So maybe there's some thought to, waiting a turn or two in order to actually kill it. But no, we're going to go ahead and make that happen right away and mush. And looking to get Amber dead as quickly as possible with all of our mopey attacks. Maybe not so mopey anymore. Attack for 6, very relevant. Pierce-Steel Paladin immediately going to get equipped with Shadow Spear. Second Sigarda's Aid deployed. Back to Benjamin we go, but we're out of Grist kills. So now what? Boseiju. Oh no. And Amber sees the writing on the wall. Boseiju just in time to get the game over with. And Ben is going to win the match 2-1 over Amber in a hard-fought match for something that is supposed to be a pretty bad matchup. It actually looked really competitive.
Yeah, I think the big adds of Surge Salvation really matter along with the Solitude. This sort of move to be Mono White Hammer with Solitude has really helped out a bunch. Speaking of helping out a bunch, Drake, it's been really fun to be in the booth with you today, but unfortunately, our time is up. You and I are going to be calling it for the day, but don't worry. We have Joe Lisette and Becky Bell coming in to finish up the last 3 rounds of Swiss and then all of top 8 today. So you're going to make sure to click that follow button. That way they know that you enjoyed me and Drake being here, and we'll be back in the future for more NRG coverage events with y'all.
It was a pleasure working with you, and we'll see you back for round 6.